Okay, so we're going to begin our next unit, which is all about a dramatic play. This play is written by Henrik Ibsen, and it's called A Doll's House. So in this lecture, this first lecture, we're going to do a little bit of background on the author and the historical context, and then we're going to look at some themes or motifs of the play that we can look for while we're reading. But first, I want to take a closer look at these two images of cover art for the play itself. Because once you see the cover art, you can sort of start to even gather some ideas of what thematic ideas are presented in the play. So in this first image, you have a house inside of a bird cage, and then this kind of silhouette of a bird flying free outside of the cage. So if we were going to look or sort of deconstruct this image a little bit, we might try to read into some of the themes or ideas presented here. So you do definitely have this idea of caged or imprisonment being represented, and also freedom or flight. The bird representing a kind of freedom or flight from being caged or imprisoned. The fact that there's a house in the cage does sort of bring up connotations of, home life, domesticity, middle class values, all of those types of, I guess, stereotypical family or household ideas that we might have for the typical home. Okay, and then the second image shows a woman wearing a white dress, so you could interpret that. It looks almost like a bridal outfit, but I don't know if it is or not. And then she's tied up, and her arms, actually her arm is free, her leg is still tied up, so she looks as almost as if she was a puppet or a marionette, one of those dolls that somebody would play with as a child, strung up by its arms and legs. And we have the title A Doll's House, prominently shown there. So we could sort of infer into this image and maybe think about possibly themes or ideas related to women's constraints or oppression, how they are tied or constrained in different ways in society. How, when one is like a puppet or like a doll, they're often maybe toyed with or manipulated or not taken seriously or have no control over themselves. So all of those kind of ideas related to constraint and power are sort of evident in this image of the girl, the young woman who is almost puppet-like and very distraught at her situation. So these are just some themes or ideas that we can start looking for once you get into your reading or once you're reflecting back on your reading. But let's go a little further into some background on this text. So one of the themes or ideas that this play brings up are the idea of gender roles, and often kind of stereotypical gender roles for men and women, especially in a kind of traditional marriage. But when you think about typical gender roles, you probably think about men as kind of the patriarch of the family, the father. He's also often the breadwinner, right? He's the main source of income in a family. And he holds a kind of place of pride over an esteem sort of status amongst his family. He's often the authority figure, the one who children or the wife have to ask permission from in a very traditional kind of patriarchal family. Excuse me. And then we think about maybe the typical or stereotypical housewife who is very much devoted to her husband, who maybe looks a certain way, who takes a lot of pride and joy in child rearing, and does most of the house care, the domestic duties of raising the children and just general housework, the domestic life, I guess, are often associated with women's roles or women's work. So we can also think about, these are stereotypical or very traditional gender roles, but often we've seen these roles shift and change over time. And a lot of that change occurred with the influence of the feminist movement and, ideas of women's liberation from those limited roles and expectations placed on them. So at the times when women were beginning to question gender roles and those traditional roles, they were sort of looking for more to life than just those typical, somewhat constrained duties or obligations or expectations placed on them just because they were female. And, so we can see in modern society a lot of those stereotypical roles have been challenged or have shifted or have changed to sort of accommodate more autonomy in women's lives. And to a greater extent, there's a lot more freedom from those traditional gender roles. However, we could also see that, there is still some baggage, cultural baggage, gender baggage, whatever you want to call that, hanging over us from those traditional stereotypical ideas. For instance, it's still somewhat expected that, women make up more of the childcare duties in a household, or women take on more of the housework responsibilities than their male partner, or certain things like that. And it's still evident today that there's a disparity between the sort of wage earned by men and women. So it's an unequal or wage gap, men making more than women for the same work. So all of these ideas are related to gender roles and norms in marriage and in the household and outside of the household and work. These are evident, and they'll come up over and over again within this play because it does deal with some of the constraints or stereotypes related to gender and both masculinity and femininity. We can sort of deconstruct or look at more closely as we go into our interpretation of the play. On the surface, you do have your main characters, Nora and Torvald Helmer, both of which have seemed very happy, and they've been married for, I think, 8 years at this point, and you see them sort of, they have a very sort of traditional type of marriage, at least on the surface. They have children, and they seem to fit into these roles quite closely. Nora being sort of more demure and obedient to her husband, letting him be the authority figure, and then Helmer being sort of more, yes, masculine or controlling and authoritative over his wife. But we see over the course of the play how these roles and ideas related to gender become challenged, or where they sort of fall apart. So there are certain breaking points or fault lines that we can see the cracks in their marriage become evident as the play goes on, and certain ideals of marriage fall apart. So we'll see how gender is conveyed in the play as we get further into the conflict faced by these characters. So our author is Henrik Ibsen, and his dates are 1828 to 1906. He's well known as a modern playwright, so his contribution to the history of drama is quite significant. He's well known for two qualities in his writing, realism and the fact that he was able to bring in problem plays or social problems into his writing. So he did not shy away from addressing social issues of that time into his play. So if we're thinking about the style of his characters and of his writing, we would describe his writing as realism, which just means he uses a very sort of naturalistic type of subject matter. He, uses a realistic type of setting. He uses the lives of ordinary people and uses very sort of naturalistic dialogue dialogue as well. So there's no elements of fantasy or make believe or it strikes the reader as a very sort of realistic portrayal. And in regards to his subject matter, he doesn't shy away from social problems. So this is a major influence or impact he's had on the history of drama is the fact that he brought social issues to the forefront of plays, to drama. So this was something that they didn't do before. So that he was really sort of influential in this regard. And in this play, he's really dealing with the social problem of women's inequality or the gender inequality between men and women. And we have a quote from him at the bottom of this slide where he conveys the importance of women's roles or rights within society. And he says, a woman cannot be herself in modern society. Since it is an exclusively male society with laws made by men and with prosecutors and judges who assess feminine conduct from a masculine standpoint. So he's really describing a kind of patriarchal society where male dominance is evident in a sort of systemic range. So from everything from the family household to, he's talking about courtrooms, prosecutors, and judges, all who are male and hold authority, and women being sort of not on equal standing or power with the men who are in control. So if we think about, the time that he was writing, this would be even, more evident, obviously, than today. But his social problem that he was addressing was the inequalities between men and women in society. And we'll get that inequality portrayed through economics, which is an interesting aspect of this play. So women's inability to control their own financial state or their own finances is one of the sort of causes of the conflict in the play. So that's one of them, but there are more. There's sort of levels of male dominance or female or feminine sort of oppression of women evident in the play. And we'll talk about some of those different layers. But Ibsen, obviously, a very sort of progressive thinking man writing about women's inequality or the inequalities of gender in where he was born was Norway, but he was talking about sort of a larger patriarchal society. So these are some prominent themes, and these would be, if you wanted to pick a theme to write your essay on, you could pick one of these ones, but these are some prominent ideas or themes that are present in the play. The first one is appearance versus reality. So there is this idea of deception or secrecy that is evident in Nora's secret from her husband. And the question I ask here is it ever okay to keep a secret from someone you love, and what does it mean to keep up appearances? Both of these questions relate to the marriage between Nora and Helmer. So Nora will keep a secret from her husband. She thinks she's doing the right thing, but it will eventually become this sort of crack in the surface of their somewhat on the perfect marriage, at least on the appearance of it. And then the second part of this question is, what does it mean to keep up appearances? So on the surface, somebody might seem to have it all together. They might seem to be happy. They might seem to be, a good person, or they have the appearance of being trustworthy. But on another level, the reality is that maybe they're falling apart inside, maybe they're a liar, maybe they're a cheater, etc. So you can never really trust surfaces, the surface appearance, especially in this play. So you do have a lot of not just deception, but things aren't always as they appear. People aren't always as they appear. And that will also be reiterated in there'll be a costume party at one point. So this theme will also be evident in little sort of symbols or motifs throughout. The second theme is money and power. So in what ways does money equal power? To what extent is happiness dependent on wealth? So for this family, Nora and Helmer and their children, they are looking forward to more wealth in the new year. The play takes place at Christmas time, and they are looking forward to a new year and Helmer's promotion. And for them, wealth means not just power, but also more freedom in life. Nora looks forward to a day when she'll be not just free of debt, but she'll be able to spend money lavishly. She's always a little bit of a spendthrift, is what her husband calls her, meaning she likes to spend a lot of money. So for this family, it seems that their happiness is somewhat dependent on their wealth, but we'll see how that kind of breaks down in terms of their ability to sort of stay happy or stay, um, content in their lives. And we also see gender related to money and power as well. So who holds the sort of purse strings in a family? Is it the woman? Is it the man? Why is it that way? We have the traditional kind of male breadwinner in this story, but we also have women who work. Mrs. Lind will be a working woman. Nora will also talk about working and finding money in other ways, which we'll talk about later. And we also have the theme of family inheritance and family duty. So there's this idea of, how much is our identity influenced by our upbringing? How much are we like our parents? Do they really have an effect on who we are and how our personality is formed? So there's this question of whether Nora is like her father, or whether the children will grow up to be like Nora, and how much similarity there is between sort of a family and the personalities that run in a family. And it'll be a kind of question of morality as well, based on how Helmer views Nora's father, and then how he begins to see Nora and her impact as well on their children. So he sort of starts seeing immorality as an inherited feature that goes through this family. And then we have the theme of love and marriage. So obviously, on the surface, this couple seems very happy, at least in Act 1. There's a lot of love and affection and sort of flirtatiousness between husband and wife. But it becomes evident, like, do they really know each other? And it's apparent that they don't really know. They have, or at least Nora has secrets from her husband, and there are fault lines in this happy marriage, right? On the surface, it's happy, but deep down, there are certain discontents or problems, troubles in this marriage. And then lastly, the gender roles as a theme. You can think about some of the bigger questions of, what is important to a man, the love of his wife or his reputation. So there'll be questions of whether, Helmer's reputation, his masculinity, his power are being subverted or challenged by his wife. You can also think about what the rules or traditions or conventions are for a married couple. So, are there roles for the typical male head of household and female housewife? What are those roles? Um, are they equal power, or does one control the other? All those kind of questions. And then lastly, are those traditional roles fulfilling for everybody? So, be the traditional husband and wife roles aren't necessarily fulfilling for every single person. Not everybody wants to be married, or not everybody feels satisfied when they experience those roles in life. So it can be something that is challenged or falls apart at some point in life if we see gender roles being questioned or challenged, which we will in this play.